listening to the Betmaker Show. This is the NFL Preseason Week 4 Betting Odds Preview for Monday, August 26th, 2019. And now, live from Las Vegas, the host of the Betmaker Show, Brian Blessing.
I love talking football. I love talking to Bruce Marshall from the Gold Sheet, Brian Blessing in Las Vegas. I hate preseason football. Yeah, it's on the board. Yeah, there's some opportunities. But Bruce, first of all, welcome aboard. We're about ready to rock and roll here. But I'm watching the Bills-Lions game Friday night as a Bills fan, and I'm literally flipping out. I'm like, just get the starters out. The Bills lost a lineman. Then their cornerback, Trey White, went down. You're like, you're going to get them out, get everybody out. And the Lions lost two guys, two starters, their leading tackler. First play of the game, Bruce, he went down. He may be out for the year. This preseason thing is just a travesty.
Well, yeah. I mean, in that regard, you're right. In these guys getting hurt, I mean, it's happened forever, and we've cited the examples many shows before, and back to the Robert James at the Bills, Joe Namath getting hurt, back to the 76ers. Man, it's happened for a long time, so you wonder why teams do it. From a betting perspective, though, I still maintain, and we're having a very good preseason. I think it's a big mistake, though, to bypass the NFL, because some of these trends continue to endure, and they are not that difficult to identify. And you don't get this sort of stuff in the regular season. You don't get it where you've got some teams where the one coach is trying for a win, and rather obviously, and the other teams just don't seem to care. And it reflects not only in the sides but in the totals. I maintain still that preseason football, from a betting perspective, is the best bargain you can get. But from a fan's perspective, like you say, it can be the most infuriating when you get situations like that with starters getting hurt. That sort of a risk, I totally agree with you, is unnecessary.
And I concur wholeheartedly with everything you said. And I think you'll relate to this maybe better than others, because you, and I bet you did the same thing somewhere else, you can relate to this because you were sitting next to me. You and I were doing a show together, week 1 preseason football. And Indy's playing at Buffalo. And Buffalo was like 1.5, 2-point favorite to start the game. They bet it across to Indy -3. And Luck wasn't going to play in the game. This is well before Luck's big story. And I said to you, I'm not going to bet it. I'm not sure what the Bills' plan of attack will be, but I don't understand what is all this love about the Colts. Anyway, they couldn't move the ball at all against the Bills. So the next week, I didn't play it, but the next week they did the same thing, Bruce. They made them 3-point favorites against Cleveland, who looked really good in their first preseason game. I'm like, what am I missing here? I'm playing it this time, and I played Cleveland. 3-point dog. They won the game 21-18. You get to the next week, the third week, but then the luck thing kind of happened during the game. But they're 3.5, 4-point favorites against the Bears at one point during the week. It got bet down. And I'm like, you've got Trubisky, Chase Daniel, and Tyler Bray against Jacoby Brissett and God knows who. And the wrong team was favored. So with confidence in the preseason, made a nice score on 2 games, where you're sitting there going, I don't know, what am I missing here? So you're right. I mean, and that's just one team. There were bountiful opportunities in the preseason.
Oh, yeah, there's tremendous opportunities. So what I think, some teams are just better bet on teams than others. If you know a coach likes to win these games and you have a working knowledge of the roster, especially the quarterback rotations, you're oftentimes handicapping backup quarterbacks. So moving on to another few teams, Minnesota. Mike Zimmer is now 20-4 in preseason as the Vikings head coach. He's got very good rotations at quarterback, and even beyond Cousins, Sean Mannion, and especially Kyle Sloter, who is a dynamo in preseason, has been great. Now, it's interesting this week, Minnesota's playing Buffalo this week, and both of these teams have won their 3 preseason games. So it might negate some there, but Minnesota's not the only team that has this sort of edge with the quarterbacks. New Orleans is another, and there certainly is the greatest example of all in preseason, which is Baltimore, which hasn't lost a game in 3 years in preseason. Now, they're the they're the Patriots of August. And, the win streak is now, I think, 16 in a row, although, unfortunately, there wasn't a payoff for the Ravens last Thursday night because of the thunderstorm, and they called that game off with 11 minutes to go at Philly. But those are the sort of edges. There's several of them out there. Week 4 is a little different, though, because it is total backup quarterbacks this week, but still some of those edges going to play.
No, there's no doubt. I mean, to that end, you brought it up, the Minnesota game. Josh Allen and Matt Barkley. Allen was a little sketchy in the 3rd preseason game, which I think they were a little frustrated with. But I can't see Buffalo exposing Allen to injury. And I will say this, Matt Barkley has been spectacular in the preseason. He came off the street and won a regular season game last year. I don't even think they want to expose him to injury. That could be Tyree Jackson for the entire game. I think Minnesota's the side there.
Yes, I do too. And listen, I mentioned Kyle Sloter a moment ago. He is one of these preseason nuggets. He has performed well in preseason. The last 3 years, it was in Denver 2 summers ago, and John Elway tried to slip him through waivers and put him on the practice squad. Minnesota said, we're going to take this kid. They've kept him on the roster. Last year, he performed well in the preseason for them, like he did Denver 2 years ago. They let Trevor Siemian walk. Now, they did bring in Sean Mannion to compete with Sloter as the backup, but Sloter has been completing over 80% of his passes, and he's leading scoring drives every time he's on the field this summer. So he's a weapon, and that's why Minnesota wins the quarterback rotations like every game, because they've got guys who can move the team no matter who's in there. And we've seen some of these other teams, when you go to their deep backups, they don't move. So as long as you know the roster and know the quarterback rotations and how they can perform, that's an angle you can bank on in preseason. It doesn't work like that in the regular season, but in August, yep, you can look at it that way.
Betmaker, let's make some money tonight.
For outstanding information and special offerings and promotions, we invite you and encourage you to sign up for our newsletter today simply by going to the website at betmaker.com. I love doing stuff like this. I just relish talking to you. And sometimes we'll just, in the course of conversation, things pop in your head. You and I had done a previous thing on the Andrew Luck thing, and while we were talking, went and looked, and hey, Indy drafted all defense because they thought they were set. Then you're going regular season win totals. It could impact a team like Tampa, who's on Indy's schedule. You can learn things in the process of doing things like this. And while you were just talking, and I wonder, maybe you've already done this because you're a really smart guy, but all of a sudden I'm sitting there going, well, wait a minute. It's be nothing more than a little outside the box thinking and invest a little time, because week 4 is a gong show. But I wonder if we went and looked at the second halves of all the first 3 weeks preseason games, and maybe even the fourth quarter of these games, because those guys that played in the fourth quarter of the first 3 games, those are the guys that are going to play the meat of this game. So I wonder if, I'm sure it wouldn't guarantee anything, but it might be a real nice edge and help you form some opinions to go back to the previous 3 weeks and focus on the teams that did really well in the fourth quarter of their first 3 preseason games.
So I go back to Kyle Sloter here, and the last 2 years he's played the bulk of preseason game 4, first for Denver in 2017 and for Minnesota last year. And his teams won both of those games. Now, Minnesota wins a lot in preseason, but that's the sort of thing, yeah, you're right. That's what you can sort of uncover when you look at these teams and you handicap this week, and this is the most unique week of all preseasons because it exists solely by itself and for those odd reasons that you mentioned. But they're putting numbers up, and I still think there are angles in week 4 preseason as well. That is even week 4 preseason is a better angle for betting than any regular season week. So just do a little bit of homework here, and you can find some real edges, I think, in week 4.
And again, while we're talking, I just clicked on to week 4 preseason, and it's my first peek at it now in 2018. And I'm going to start to dive through this. They're actually, I'm a little surprised. I was thinking a lot of these games could be really pedestrian. The funny thing is, it seems like a regular mixed bag of low and high, but actually a lot of these games are a lot higher scoring than I would have envisioned with the guys that are out there.
Yeah, and remember, it's backup defenders too, and who's ever left, and they've still got one more big cut to go. So none of the first stringers at all are playing on defense either. That's an interesting point, though, on the total side. Although there's a few teams that have been exceptions this August, Buffalo being one of them. The Bills have played 3 straight games that have gone over. The majority of the games this summer have been unders, and that is with generally reduced totals. Usually, preseason totals are a few points lower than regular season, just on average. This year, though, they haven't been able to make the totals low enough for a lot of these teams, and there's a lot of unders. You look at the logs in the Gold Sheet, our new one out this week, you can see some of these teams, many of them have been under every game, Denver being one, San Francisco another, and several others. So it's under in preseason thus far, but you're right, doesn't necessarily translate to week 4.
Well, just an interesting discussion. I'll rattle it off, Bruce. Week 4 last year, here are the passing leaders in those games. Brock Osweiler, Philip Walker, Baker Mayfield. Okay, Mayfield, no way this year. But Danny Etling, Joe Callahan, Kyle Allen, Tanner Lee, Kevin Hogan, Tyler Bray, Kyle Sloter, Taysom Hill, Joe Webb, Chase Litton, Paxton Lynch, Nick Mullins, EJ Manuel. Wow.
Yeah, that's not a regular season lineup, and it'll be just the same this week. Funny you mentioned Paxton Lynch. I think he'll probably get another look for the Seahawks when they play the Raiders Thursday night.
Oh, by the way, Philip Walker last year in week 4, just food for thought. He threw for 263 yards. You're going to be seeing a lot of Philip Walker this week. Let me tell you that. That's going to happen.
Yes, and that game, I think, was 27-26 against the Bengals, higher scoring game. And that was way the highest scoring game of the Colts last preseason. So, yeah, it doesn't, that's the other thing. It doesn't necessarily mean that these are all going to be low scoring games in week 4. Sometimes it's backup defenders in there too, and that can help the scorelines. Yep.
Bruce, low-hanging fruit, buddy. Look at this. The Colts-Bengals game, the total is 33.5. It's 33.5. And the Bengals, you're not going to see Andy Dalton, but you're going to get Driscoll and Finley. That total's 33. I think I just found one. I think I like over 33.5 in that game.
Yes, and back a few years, last year that game went over. They always close each other. These cities are only like 100 miles apart, so it's always the last preseason game. When Marvin Lewis and Pagano had been there, they had a series of really low-scoring games. But they're both gone. Pagano was gone from Indy last year, and he mentioned Walker's stats, and it was a higher-scoring game. And this summer, new coach Zach Taylor at Cincy, and the Bengals have been they've been over 2 of their first 3. So not necessarily a low-scoring game. You're right, Colts and Bengals this week.
All right, it's the tail end. Why don't you give me, and we'll wrap it up with this. I'll give you the soapbox to go. Did you learn? I'm sure you learned a lot, but how we actually apply it and what it means to the regular season. Biggest takeaways in the preseason, and maybe things that you would apply when they're playing for real.
Very little, actually, because I've come to the point where I regard August as its own season, and it is basically its own season. So I don't know that there's much transfer into the regular season. However, there are a few things that may apply a little bit deeper into the regular season. One, the teams that have a real drop-off when their first stringers go out, especially on defense, if a team starts to, and this may not hit until October or November, if a team like Denver is going to start getting guys hurt on defense, they're going to be in trouble because the Broncos' second-string defenders, when they were playing against better quarterbacks in the first few preseason games, really dropped off. So some of these teams, you look at the depth is that's one thing you sort of see in the preseason. That may not translate into week one of the regular season, but don't forget about that when you get in August and I'm getting to late October, November, when injuries start piling up and these teams have to test their depth. Some of these teams, the depth is not that good, and that's what you sort of see in the preseason. But keep that in mind when we get deeper into the regular season, because that's when this stuff's going to play.
And just one overview, and we'll talk more about this next week, but I would think one thing to watch too is at the beginning, you're asking guys to play 60 minutes of football in coming out of the gate, and they're all shaking off rust. Then fatigue becomes a factor. And again, I'm looking back at week one last year, a handful of low-scoring games, but for the most part, seems like in the very beginning, edge to the offenses, and I would think part of that is too, Bruce, you're playing 60 minutes for the first time, but in the preseason, all these guys aren't showing anything. It's just as vanilla and as base as it can be, and they're dialing up some fresh stuff. So I think in week one, it's edge to the offense.
It seems like it, Brian, and you're right. I mean, a lot of these guys, they haven't been playing games. They hit camp in shape, unlike the old days when they would use the games to get in shape. But you're right. I mean, these guys haven't. None of them have been playing 60 minutes, full games in the summer. So that translated, at least last year, to a little bit higher scoring, and that may again work when we kick things off for real in next week.
And as we're doing it real quick, I just look at week 2 and take a very quick first blush look at it. Yeah, a lot more lower scoring games in week 2 where defenses realize the mistakes they made. They make adjustments. They've got tape on the team they're going to play and game plan, and they're in more game shape. So it actually does translate. Week 1, higher scoring. Week 2, there were a lot more. There were still some ridiculous games, but it seemed like across the board, a lot more lower scoring games than we saw in week 1. Food for thought.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean it's going to happen, but it makes sense.
It does. I mean, that's the sort of thing, you look at, and sometimes those trends endure, but it makes sense to me. So we'll keep that in mind when we kick things off for real next week.
All right, buddy. Hey, real quick, last thing we'll do here, just tell them about the Gold Sheet, because it's a historic, legendary publication. And not only do you get all the great breakdowns on all the games, but you tell historic footnotes and really interesting stories. I just wanted to give you a second to just talk about the history of the Gold Sheet and starting another season.
Thanks, Brian. Very much so. Yeah, 63rd season, and we're actually now fully based in Las Vegas, so a little easier. For me, at least, to do everything here. And our first issue is out right now. Now, it covers college football for this first big weekend coming up. Reminiscing, of course, great opening weeks in the past. We do a nice little bit on the UCLA-Tennessee game in '67. Still the best opener that I can remember in my lifetime. And we are having a very good preseason, by the way, on a 14-1 run. So it's been a good August for us at the Gold Sheet.
All right. We love having you on board, and we're going to talk about college football in a subsequent podcast. Bruce, let's play some football. Thanks for doing this.
Betmaker, let's make some money tonight.
Well, that's the Betmaker Show for now. We publish multiple times each week. We'd like to thank you for listening, and if you liked what you heard, please take a moment to leave a rating and review, or subscribe to our show feed, or share our show with a friend or two and help us grow the show. We very much appreciate it. Visit us on the web at betmaker.com. And reminder to sign up for the newsletter. Thanks to our engineer, Darren Vandermolen, and producer, Mike Gallivan. The Betmaker Show is a production of Cardinal Marketing Incorporated. Betmaker is a registered trademark. Any rebroadcast, reproduction, or other use of this content without the express written consent of Cardinal Marketing Incorporated is strictly prohibited.
The handicapping and sports odds information contained on this podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Please confirm the wagering regulations in your jurisdiction, as they vary from state to state, province to province, and country to country. Using this information to contravene any law or statute is prohibited. The podcast is not associated with, nor is it endorsed by any professional or collegiate league, association, or team. This podcast does not target and is not intended for an audience under the age of 18. If you think that you have a gambling addiction, stop this podcast now and please seek help.
Gambling and betting on sports is a form of entertainment and should be about having a good time. But when done excessively, it may negatively affect other areas of a person's life, such as their physical and mental health, school or work performance, finances, and or interpersonal relationships. At Betmaker.com and The Betmaker Show, we're concerned about the addiction that gambling may cause, and for this reason, we encourage everyone to practice responsible gambling, an approach to gambling that helps you ensure that it remains an enjoyable activity. Here are the main principles of responsible gambling. Don't think of gambling as a way to make money. Always gamble with money that you can afford to lose. Set limits and stick to them. Never chase losses. Don't gamble when you're depressed or upset, and create a healthy balance. Always be aware of how much time you spend gambling or thinking about gambling. And do not allow gambling to cause you to miss out on time with family and friends or time spent on other activities you enjoy. By following these guidelines, gambling can be a good time and great entertainment. If you feel at any time that your gambling is taking away from important areas of your life, is causing you stress or depression, or is leading to financial losses that are beyond your control, please reach out for help. Learn more at responsiblegambling.org.